5 years ago, a devastating fire took everything from billionaire CEO Victoria Sterling. Her husband and infant daughter were presumed dead in the ashes. Now, standing on a bustling New York street, a little girl with familiar green eyes just grabbed a stranger's hand and yelled, "Dad!" Victoria froze. Rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling Enterprises boardroom, mirroring the stormy temperament of the woman at the head of the mahogany table. Victoria Sterling, a 32-year-old self-made billionaire, commanded the room with an icy detachment that terrified her corporate rivals and intimidated her own board of directors. She had built a logistics and tech empire from the ground up, ruthlessly acquiring competitors and streamlining supply chains. But those closest to her, a very small, very elite circle, knew that her ambition was not fueled by greed. It was fueled by an all-consuming, desperate need to outrun her own memories. 5 years prior, Victoria had been a different person. She had been wildly in love with her husband, Benjamin Hayes, a charming architectural engineer, and they had just welcomed a beautiful baby girl named Lily. Life had felt dangerously perfect until the 4th of July weekend. They had chartered a private yacht off the coast of Nantucket. Victoria had stayed on shore to finalize a sudden, critical acquisition deal, while Benjamin took baby Lily out on the water with a small crew. A catastrophic engine failure led to an explosion. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, there was nothing left but charred debris bobbing in the Atlantic. No bodies were ever recovered. The official ruling was death by misadventure. Victoria had buried an empty casket, locked away her heart, and poured every ounce of her shattered soul into becoming untouchable. Now, half a decade later, the storm outside broke, giving way to a crisp, unexpectedly beautiful autumn afternoon in Manhattan. Richard Sullivan, Victoria's fiercely loyal head of security and a former intelligence operative, gently suggested she take a rare walk. Reluctantly, Victoria agreed, leaving the glass tower behind to step into the vibrant, noisy reality of Central Park. Golden leaves drifted down around them as they walked along the mall. Victoria wore a sharp charcoal trench coat, her eyes hidden behind dark designer sunglasses. She was barely listening to Richard outline the security protocols for an upcoming gala in Paris. Her mind was, as always, millions of miles away. Suddenly, a blur of bright yellow darted across the paved pathway. A little girl, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, wearing a yellow raincoat and holding a half-eaten pretzel, was running entirely too fast for her little legs. She tripped over an exposed tree root, tumbling onto the hard concrete. Before Victoria or Richard could react, the child scrambled up, dusted off her knees with surprising resilience, and bolted toward a tall man standing near a hot dog vendor. She grabbed the edge of his worn canvas jacket. "Dad!" the little girl squealed, her voice ringing out like a bell over the ambient noise of the park. "Dad, look! A doggy!" Victoria stopped walking, her breath hitched painfully in her throat. There was something about the cadence of the girl's voice, the exact shade of her emerald green eyes, that sent a violent shockwave through Victoria's nervous system. Lily would have been exactly that age. Lily had those exact same eyes, Victoria's eyes. The man turned around to look down at the child. As he shifted his profile into the autumn sunlight, Victoria's entire world stopped spinning. The ambient noise of the park, the chatter of tourists, the distant siren, the rustling leaves, all faded into a deafening vacuum. He had a thick beard now, and his hair was longer, streaked with premature silver at the temples, but the bone structure was unmistakable. The slight, crooked bend in his nose from a college rugby injury, the distinct jagged scar resting just beneath his jawline. It was Benjamin. Her lungs refused to draw in air. Her knees buckled slightly, but Richard's firm hand instantly caught her elbow stabilizing her. "Ms. Sterling?" "Victoria, what is it? Are you ill?" Richard asked, his voice sharp with immediate concern, his eyes scanning the crowd for a threat. Victoria couldn't speak. She could only point a trembling, manicured finger toward the hot dog stand. Benjamin was hoisting the little girl up onto his shoulders, laughing. It was a sound Victoria had played on a loop in her darkest nightmares, a sound she thought she would never hear again in the waking world. "That's—" Victoria choked out, pulling off her sunglasses, her eyes wide with a mixture of absolute terror and impossible hope. "Richard, that's Benjamin." Richard's gaze snapped to the man. Having reviewed Victoria's entire background file when he was hired, he knew exactly what Benjamin Hayes looked like, his brow furrowed in deep, professional skepticism. "Ms. Sterling, that's impossible. Benjamin Hayes has been legally dead for 5 years. We have the Coast Guard reports." "Look at his jaw," she whispered frantically, tears spilling hot and fast down her cheeks, ruining her pristine makeup. "The scar. Look at the way he holds her left foot. He always used to hold Lily's left foot, just like that when he picked her up. It's him." "My God, Richard, it's him. And that girl." Before she could finish the sentence, Benjamin turned, walking swiftly toward the Bethesda terrace, blending into the thick crowd of afternoon tourists. Victoria lunged forward, desperate to scream his name, to chase him down, but her high heels caught on the cobblestone, and she stumbled. Richard caught her again, holding her firmly. "Let me go!" she screamed, dropping her billionaire CEO facade entirely, morphing back into a grieving wife and mother in an instant. "Victoria, stop!" Richard ordered quietly but firmly, pulling her out of the main walkway. "If that is him, running screaming through Central Park will cause a scene that will be on the front page of every tabloid in an hour. You are the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. If he faked his death, he did it for a reason. If you spook him, he might run again. Let me do my job." Trembling uncontrollably, Victoria leaned against a stone wall, gasping for air. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her husband was alive. Her daughter was alive. But why hadn't they come home? Silence reigned supreme in the sprawling, 60-floor penthouse of the Sterling Tower. For 3 agonizing days, Victoria had locked herself inside, cancelling high-stakes meetings with foreign investors and ignoring frantic emails from her executive board. She sat curled in an armchair by the window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline, nursing a glass of bourbon she never actually drank. Across the room, Richard Sullivan had turned the massive marble dining table into a war room. Photographs pulled from Central Park security cameras, facial recognition data, and financial records were spread out like pieces of a horrifying puzzle. Richard had utilized resources that bordered on illegal, tapping into federal databases and private surveillance networks. "I have him," Richard said suddenly, his deep voice slicing through the heavy silence of the penthouse. Victoria was out of her chair in a millisecond, abandoning the bourbon. She rushed to the table, her eyes scanning the documents. "His name is Arthur Blake," Richard explained, pointing to a DMV printout showing Benjamin's face, albeit looking tired and aged. According to the paper trail, Arthur Blake came into existence exactly 4 years and 10 months ago, 2 months after the yacht explosion. He has a perfectly backdated social security number, which means whoever set this up paid top dollar for professional ghosting services. He lives in a modest brownstone in Brooklyn and runs an independent bookstore on the ground floor. Victoria touched the photograph of the little girl. "And her?" "Mia Blake," Richard said softly. No birth certificate on file at any New York hospital. Officially, she was born in a rural clinic in Vermont, but the clinic mysteriously burned down 3 years ago, all records destroyed. It's a classic cover story. Rage, potent and blinding, began to replace Victoria's shock. He had lied. He had orchestrated the most painful day of her life, watched her mourn him from the shadows, and stolen their child. "Get the car," Victoria commanded, her voice turning into crushed ice. "We're going to Brooklyn." The drive across the bridge felt like a death march. Victoria sat in the back of the blacked-out SUV, her hands clutched into tight fists. She mentally prepared herself for the confrontation. She would destroy him. She would take Lily back, hire the best ruthless lawyers in the country, and ensure Benjamin spent the rest of his natural life in a federal penitentiary for kidnapping and fraud. The SUV pulled up to a quiet, tree-lined street in Park Slope. A weathered wooden sign hung above a quaint, slightly run-down shop, Blake's Books and Curiosities. "Do you want me to come in with you?" Richard asked from the front seat, his hand resting near his concealed holster. "No," Victoria said, stepping out onto the pavement. "This is between a husband and a wife." A small brass bell chimed cheerfully as Victoria pushed the heavy wooden door open. The shop smelled of vanilla, old paper, and dust. It was incredibly quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. She walked past aisles of meticulously organized vintage novels, her expensive heels clicking ominously on the hardwood floor. At the back of the shop, behind a large oak counter, he stood. Benjamin. He was wearing a faded grey sweater, carefully inspecting the spine of a first-edition Hemingway. Victoria stopped 10 feet away. She took a deep breath, marshalling every ounce of the commanding presence that made her a billionaire. "Hello, Benjamin," she said. The man looked up. He blinked, a polite, entirely confused smile spreading across his face. He looked at her not with guilt, not with fear, but with the mild curiosity of a shopkeeper greeting a new customer. "I'm sorry, miss," he said, his voice the exact rich baritone she remembered, though lacking any trace of recognition. "I think you have me confused with someone else. My name is Arthur Blake. Can I help you find something specific today?" Victoria stared at him. She searched his eyes, the same warm brown eyes she had stared into at the altar. There was no flicker of panic, no micro-expression of deception, just genuine confusion. "Stop it," she hissed, taking a step forward. "Stop playing this sick game. Do you know what you did to me? Do you know what I went through burying an empty box while you were playing bookstore owner in Brooklyn? Where is my daughter?" Benjamin, Arthur, took a step back, his polite smile fading into slight alarm. He instinctively reached under the counter, perhaps for a panic button. "Mum, I don't know who you are, or what you're talking about. If you don't lower your voice and leave, I'm going to have to call the police. You're scaring me." He meant it. Victoria, a master of reading people in the boardroom, felt a cold dread wash over her. He truly did not know who she was. Before she could push further, a curtain behind the counter parted. The little girl from the park, Mia, skipped out, holding a drawing. "Daddy, look! I drew a monster!" she announced proudly. Victoria's eyes darted to the child. The girl was wearing a sleeveless summer dress. As she held up the paper, Victoria saw it. On the little girl's left collarbone, there was a distinct, crescent moon-shaped birthmark. It was the exact same birthmark Victoria had kissed on baby Lily's skin just hours before they boarded the yacht. It was her. It was definitely her. "Mia, go back into the kitchen with Mom," Arthur said firmly, placing a protective hand on the child's shoulder, keeping his eyes fixed warily on Victoria. Victoria felt the floor drop out beneath her. "Mum?" The curtain rustled again. Arthur, is everything okay out here? The timer for the roast just went off. A woman stepped out from the back room, wiping flour from her hands onto an apron. Victoria looked at the woman's face, and for the second time in 3 days, her reality violently fractured. The woman standing next to Benjamin, acting as the mother to Victoria's stolen child, was Rachel Miller, Victoria's former college roommate, her maid of honor, and the woman who had mysteriously vanished off the grid 3 weeks before the yacht explosion. Rachel locked eyes with Victoria. Unlike Benjamin, Rachel's eyes filled with instant, unadulterated terror. The flour-covered dish towel slipped from her trembling hands, hitting the floor with a soft, damning thud. The soft thud of the dish towel hitting the hardwood floor sounded like a gunshot in the agonizing silence of the bookstore. Rachel Miller, once the vibrant, ambitious woman who had shared Victoria's dorm room at Yale, stood paralyzed, the color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain ghost under the warm, vintage lighting of the shop. Victoria didn't yell. She didn't lunge forward. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal short-circuited her capacity for immediate rage, replacing it with a terrifying, absolute stillness. This was the woman who had held Victoria's hair back when she was sick in college. This was the woman who had stood beside her at the altar, smiling in a periwinkle bridesmaid dress. This was the woman who had held baby Lily in the hospital ward, weeping tears of supposed joy. "Rachel," Victoria said, her voice dropping an octave, resonating with the lethal calm of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "What have you done?" Arthur, Benjamin, looked frantically between the two women, his protective instincts flaring. He stepped in front of Rachel, shielding her from Victoria's icy glare. "Rachel, honey, do you know this woman? She's rambling about an empty box and a stolen child. I was just about to call the police." Rachel's mouth opened, but only a ragged, pathetic gasp escaped. She grabbed the back of Benjamin's grey sweater, her knuckles turning white. "Call them," Victoria challenged, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. The click of her heel echoed ominously. "Please, Benjamin, pick up the phone and dial 911. Let's have the NYPD come down here. Let's have them run a DNA test on that beautiful little girl in the kitchen. Let's have them run your fingerprints through the federal database. Because when they do, they are going to find out that Arthur Blake does not exist, and they are going to find out that the woman cowering behind you is a kidnapper." Benjamin's brow furrowed in deep, agonizing confusion. He looked back at Rachel, his eyes pleading for her to defend them, to laugh off the crazy woman in the trench coat. "Rachel, tell her she's insane. Tell her to get out of our store." Rachel squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear cutting a track through the flour dusted on her cheek. She slowly shook her head. "I can't, Ben." Hearing his real name fall from Rachel's lips was the catalyst. Benjamin staggered back, as if physically struck. "Ben. Why did you just call me Ben? My name is Arthur. Rachel, what is going on?" Victoria didn't give Rachel the chance to spin another web. "Your name is Benjamin Hayes. You are an architectural engineer. You graduated top of your class from MIT. You have a scar under your jaw from a rugby match in your junior year, and you are allergic to penicillin. You are my husband. And 5 years ago, you and our daughter, Lily, were in a catastrophic boat explosion off the coast of Nantucket." Benjamin pressed the heels of his hands against his temples, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. No, that's not true. I was in a car crash, in Vermont. Rachel and we hit black ice. I woke up in the clinic. I had head trauma. The doctor said my memory might never come back." He looked at Rachel, his voice cracking with a sudden, desperate vulnerability. "Right, Rach. That's what happened. We were driving to a cabin. A car crash. Victoria let out a dark, humorless laugh that held absolutely no joy. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers flying across the screen. She brought up a digital file Richard had compiled, photographs of Benjamin and Victoria laughing at a charity gala, Benjamin holding a newborn Lily in the maternity ward, their wedding day. She slammed the phone down on the oak counter, right on top of the first edition Hemingway. "Look at the photos, Benjamin. Look at your life." Benjamin hesitated, his hands trembling as he reached for the glowing screen. He stared at the images. He swiped to the next one, and the next. He stared at a photograph of himself, looking at Victoria, with a love so profound it seemed to radiate through the glass of the phone. He didn't remember feeling it, but he couldn't deny the face staring back at him. It was his face, unaged, unburdened by the heavy beard, but undeniably him. He slowly lifted his eyes to Rachel. The betrayal dawning in his expression was devastating. "You told me all our photos were lost in the fire at our old apartment. You told me we didn't have any family left to contact." Rachel finally broke. A wretched sob tore from her throat, and her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the floor behind the counter, burying her face in her flower-covered hands. "I loved you," Rachel screamed, the sound muffled and pathetic. "I loved you first, Ben. Long before Victoria ever noticed you at that stupid campus mixer. I was the one who listened to you talk about architecture for hours. I was the one who understood you. But she was the billionaire in the making. She was the glamorous one. She always got everything she wanted." Victoria stood frozen, her blood turning to ice. The motive wasn't money. It was the oldest, most venomous poison in the world: envy. "The explosion," Victoria whispered, the horror of the implication dawning on her. "Did you sabotage the yacht, Rachel?" "No." Rachel snapped her head up, her eyes wild and manic. "No, I swear to God, Victoria, I didn't. It was a faulty fuel line, just like the Coast Guard said. I was supposed to be on that boat with you both. I was driving up to the marina when I saw the smoke. When I got to the docks, it was chaos." Rachel scrambled to her knees, looking at Benjamin with a twisted, desperate affection. "I rented a skiff. I went out into the bay before the rescue choppers arrived. I found you holding on to a piece of the hull, keeping Lily above the water. You were bleeding from your head, unconscious. I pulled you both into the boat." "And you didn't call for help," Benjamin stated, his voice hollow, as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. "I was going to," Rachel cried, "but when you woke up in the hospital in Vermont, you didn't know who you were. You didn't know your name. You looked at me, and you asked if I was your wife. The doctors said you had profound retrograde amnesia from the hypoxia and the trauma. And I just said yes." Victoria felt violently ill. "You stole my husband. You stole my baby. You let me bury an empty casket and mourn for 5 years while you played house with my family." "She was never around anyway," Rachel spat back, her delusion hardening into a defensive shell. "You were always working, Victoria, always building your empire. You didn't appreciate the quiet life. I gave him a quiet life. I gave Mia a mother who is actually present." Before Victoria could unleash the physical violence that was suddenly boiling in her veins, the brass bell above the shop door chimed. Richard Sullivan stepped inside. He took one look at the scene: the sobbing woman on the floor, the pale, hyperventilating man, and his boss standing rigid as a statue, and immediately assessed the threat level. "Ms. Sterling," Richard said smoothly, his hand resting casually on his lapel. "The perimeter is secure. I've taken the liberty of contacting a specialized unit of the NYPD, headed by an old colleague of mine. They are waiting 2 blocks away." Shall I signal them?" Victoria looked at Rachel. The woman she had once called a sister was now a stranger, a monster wrapped in a domestic apron. "Signal them, Richard," Victoria said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Tell them we have a confession for kidnapping, fraud, and identity theft." Within 20 minutes, unmarked police vehicles surrounded the quiet Brooklyn brownstone. The fallout was swift and dictated entirely by Victoria Sterling's immense resources. Rachel Miller was escorted out in handcuffs, sobbing hysterically as she was placed into a cruiser. She would face decades in federal prison for the life she had stolen. Inside the bookstore, the atmosphere was heavy with the wreckage of a shattered reality. A child psychologist gently explained to little Lily that she was going on a trip, while Benjamin sat on a vintage leather sofa, his head buried in his hands. He looked utterly broken. He looked up as Victoria approached. "I don't remember you," he whispered, the admission carrying a devastating weight. "I'm trying, but there's just nothing. It's like trying to read a book with blank pages." Victoria sat down slowly. 5 years ago, she would have demanded he remember. Now, corporate warfare and unimaginable grief had forged her into a woman of immense patience. "I know," Victoria said softly. "The doctors said the trauma and Rachel's psychological conditioning built a heavy block. We will figure this out." "And if I never remember," Benjamin asked, tears filling his eyes, "if I'm always Arthur Blake in my head?" "Then I'll introduce myself," Victoria said, forcing a brave smile. "Hi, I'm Victoria. I like bourbon, I work too much, and I have loved you since I was 22. Benjamin let out a wet chuckle. "Hi, I'm Ben, apparently." Just then, the psychologist walked out with the little girl in the yellow dress. Lily looked around with wide, confused green eyes. "Daddy?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Where did Mum go?" Victoria took a deep breath, kneeling eye level with her daughter. "Hi, sweetheart," Victoria said gently. "My name is Victoria. I know this is really scary right now, but your dad and I are going to make sure you are perfectly safe. We're going to a really nice place where you can draw all the monsters you want, okay?" Lily hesitated, then gave a small nod. The transition was not magical. There was no sudden flood of memories or cinematic embrace. The reality was a logistical and emotional mountain. Within 48 hours, Victoria moved Benjamin and Lily into a highly secure, private estate in upstate New York. She stepped down as the day-to-day CEO of Sterling Enterprises, dedicating her massive fortune entirely to her family's recovery. She hired elite neurologists and trauma therapists. They established a routine. Benjamin began the grueling process of cognitive therapy, trying to chip away at the amnesia. Lily slowly began to adapt to her new surroundings, aided by intensive therapy and her father's reassuring presence. Victoria played the longest, hardest game of her life. She didn't push or demand to be called Mom. She became a constant, gentle presence. She sat with Benjamin in the evenings, showing him photo albums without expecting any recognition. She sat on the floor with Lily for hours, coloring pictures, slowly earning the little girl's trust. Weeks turned into months. Autumn leaves gave way to winter snow. One evening, Victoria sat by the fireplace in the estate's library, reviewing legal documents for Rachel's upcoming trial. Benjamin sat in an armchair across from her, reading a novel. Lily was on the rug between them, building a complicated tower out of wooden blocks. The tower wobbled, and with a loud clatter, it collapsed. One block rolled and stopped directly against Victoria's foot. Lily sighed in frustration. She crawled over, reaching for the block. As she grabbed it, she looked up. The firelight reflected in the little girl's emerald green eyes, eyes that were a perfect mirror of Victoria's own. "Thank you," Lily said softly. She paused, tilting her head as if evaluating something deeply important. Then, with breathtaking innocence, she added, "Can you help me build it again?" "Mama." Victoria froze. The legal documents slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor. She looked over at Benjamin. He had lowered his book, his brown eyes wide, with silent, overwhelming emotion. He offered Victoria a small, encouraging smile, and for the very first time since the bookstore, there was a flicker of profound, genuine recognition in his gaze. Victoria slowly slid off the sofa, joining her daughter on the floor. Her hands shook as she picked up a wooden block. "I would love to help you build it again," Victoria whispered, a tear of pure joy finally slipping down her cheek. "We'll build it together." What an unbelievable journey, from a heartbreaking deception to the slow, beautiful process of rebuilding a shattered family. Victoria proved that true strength isn't just in the boardroom, it's in the heart. If this emotional roller coaster left you speechless, please hit that like button. Share Victoria's incredible story of resilience with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, real-life drama. What would you have done in her shoes? Let us know below.